Welcome back, everybody, to Biology Connections. This is a web series show where we take a look at the interdisciplinary connections between different schools of thoughts, different things that we learn in college, and how they all come together to benefit society, to benefit the planet, and to even benefit ourselves here locally at Northland College. And so today we have a special person in here with us, Dr. Michael Lindquist, who is a professor of philosophy here at Northland College. Thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you for having me.
I know. I'm very excited about this one because we're going to get in talking about ticks, and this is the first time I've had a chance to talk about ticks. But before we get there, could you take a little bit of time to tell us about yourself, what you do here at Northland, what you do in your profession as a whole?
Sure. So I'm a philosophy professor, and I teach the philosophy classes here at Northland College. So that's everything from logic to ancient Greek philosophy to then, of course, the environmental philosophy classes, which are really the core of what I teach here. On top of that, I do research, so a lot of my research is on environmental philosophy in outer space. So thinking about issues surrounding space exploration, such as whether or not space debris is litter or pollution, the ethics of terraforming, wilderness preservation on Mars, all of that good stuff is what I do.
Wow, so you got a lot of space to cover with that, right?
I do. I do. Yeah, the universe is quite big.
It is quite big. And with that, right, you also do a lot of writing, but you also do a lot of public speaking. You actually just returned from an event where you spoke on your field of expertise. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So it was a conference in Kiruna, Sweden. It was hosted by the Society for Social and Conceptual Issues in Astrobiology, as well as the European Astrobiology Institute. And it was looking at the social, moral, and ethical and legal frontiers in space exploration. My particular talk was on the eco-politics of space settlements, and thinking about how we ought to organize space settlements and space exploration politically.
Wow. So, again, right, this is kind of a, it seems so sci-fi, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, right, like you think about, right, it was a long time ago that we actually put a rover on Mars, right? And so, like, to think ahead of time on these things would be a huge boon for when the time comes that we actually do that, so.
Exactly, right? We want to consider these problems before suddenly we have capabilities that we're not ready to handle.
I see.
Right? Always asking that sort of classic sci-fi question, right? The question is not whether we can do it, but should we?
Yep.
So we want to make sure we address those ethical concerns ahead of time.
Well, I'm not sure we'll get to it today, but maybe a future episode will be ticks in space, right? That would be a great one. But today, I kind of want to talk about a question I get all the time, right? So when I worked on my master's, I worked on ticks. When I did my PhD, I worked on mosquitoes and West Nile virus. And even now, working on ticks up here at Northland, I always get the question over and over again, why don't we just wipe out all the mosquitoes? Why don't we just wipe out all the ticks? And, I mean, I have my answers as a biologist, right? And looking at the interconnectedness of these insects and ticks out there. Mosquitoes are important pollinators, right? They're an important food source for fish and birds and other animals. Ticks, food source as well, but also even the diseases that they transmit help keep pest populations down, right? So even the diseases that we're scared of help us by reducing pest populations. But I guess, having you here, I think the bigger question is like beyond biology, right? What are some of the bigger ideas, some of the humanity that we have when it comes to things that we consider to be bad for us, right? What is the ethical and moral dilemma when it comes to just wiping out an entire group of organisms for our benefit?
Yeah, so I think this comes down to something in ethics that we call moral status. So this question of who or what matters morally and why. And so there are all sorts of different answers to this question, right? One of them, a very common one, one that I think a lot of our courses and our general orientation here at Northland often pushes up against, is anthropocentrism. The idea that only human beings matter. Right? If only human beings matter morally, we might say, goodbye ticks, we hate you. Right? That's one option. But we still might take a look at it in a further direction here and look at, say, something like the fact that they maybe are pollinators. Right? Okay, if the ticks are engaging in pollination, right, and they're helping the ecosystem thrive, and the ecosystem helps us thrive too, by indirectly based on the activities of the tick. Keep gesturing towards the tick on the table here.
Yes,
sorry. In that instance, then we maybe have something that we call like an enlightened anthropocentrism. Human beings are still the only things that matter, and the ticks actually help us through sustaining the ecology that helps to sustain us. So one answer is anthropocentrism. We could also say that individuals matter based on whether they can feel pain. And so then the question, at least as far as the tick is concerned, is can the tick feel pain? We might also take a look at whether it's conscious, right? If it's a conscious being, then it can maybe experience its own life as going better or worse for it, such that its well-being then matters morally. It's something that we have to consider. Another option, to keep going with the list here, is biocentrism. We could say everything that is alive matters morally, right? There's something about living that matters. That helps us get not only ticks, but maybe individual plants and cells and things like that. And so it gets very complicated very quickly, right, when I take a step outside or breathe.
And then an antibiotic, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? So we have a lot of trade-offs that need to be considered in a theory like that. We could also say that ecosystems matter morally, right? And so insofar as, again, the pollinators helping to sustain the ecosystem, and we have this notion in ecology sometimes of ecosystem health, right? Well, the pollinator is essential to that. And so it doesn't even then go back to human beings and the benefits that they give to us. The benefits they give to the ecosystem, those are enough, because the ecosystem matters morally. And the ticks are a part of sustaining its well-being.
And so, with that, especially, we're talking about the anthropomorphic viewpoint of it, right? Part of being human is the ability to have empathy, right? To feel what someone else feels. But, I pass that on. Like, I look at my cat. My cat is not human, but, if my cat's in pain, I'm in pain. I take the cat to the vet. He gets a shot. I get sad, right?
Sure.
And that's the way that is, because I understand pain, and I believe that my cat feels pain the same way I do. Now, if we take this idea of pain and go a little bit further with it, right, like evolutionarily, organisms are basically driven by either something is nice or something is not, right? It's pleasurable or it's painful. And, the pleasurable things drive us to do that more, right? We like to eat things that taste good, right? And the things that taste good evolutionarily helped us out, right? Same things. But then, on the other end, right, pain helps us to avoid things, right? Like I don't climb on those metal jungle gyms that were over concrete that I had when a child, right? I learned that causes pain. And so from that viewpoint, right, we could probably say everything will experience some kind of pain, some kind of displeasure to it, right? So let's just focus on the ticks, because yes, we can take that a long ways down.
Yeah, I don't know about rocks.
Right, rocks, things like that, right? When it comes to the tick, let's just say that it feels pain, but not the way we would consider pain, right? Like, where do we kind of, in that idea of pain, do we draw that line? Or is there a line? Should we even draw a line of what pain is?
Yeah, so of course, trying to figure out what pain is a fundamental sort of question, right? And it's really tough to try and study this without exporting our own experiences of pain. I cannot know what it is like to be a tick. I can try and crawl around and suck blood or something like that, but I'm still not going to understand what it's like to be a tick. And how they might feel pain. Obviously, at least there's some perhaps neurological sort of research we can do if we're going to think about there being a neurological basis for pain. Still being able to capture discrete mental states, difficult.
Right.
So it's possible that they experience pain differently than us. Certainly the particular psychological aspects of pain, like the mental anguish that we can feel, maybe they don't feel at all, or insofar as they feel it, it's to such a different degree that it's practically a difference in kind. One option here is to say, this is a hard question, and it may be an unanswerable question.
Okay.
If it is, what should we do? Well, we might think of applying something we call the precautionary principle. We don't know. But on the basis of perhaps our close evolutionary relationship, right? We still have neural structures and everything like that. If we think pain is rooted in neural structures here, well, maybe we can assume it's relevant. We don't know, but let's treat them as if they feel a morally relevant kind of pain. So that's the other thing. Yeah, there might be different kinds of pain. Perhaps they're all morally relevant. Perhaps some of them aren't. But again, we might just say, hard question, don't know. Or we could say, pain doesn't matter. Well, that's another option here too, right? We're focused on something else.
Right. And, because obviously when we talk about like the practical application of these things, which is often when we talk about research and we talk about the things that we do as academics, right? Ultimately, we are looking, hopefully one day, for it to be applied. It may not be today, right? We're not going to apply any morals and ethics about Mars today, but we think about it now for when the time comes. And so, I for our viewers out there, right, I don't know if I'll ever convince you to kindly place a tick that's been feeding on you back into the woods. I'm not asking that, right? But instead the question, becomes is, can we still protect ourselves and be kind, right? How do we think about how do we treat these organisms? Because we do think about this, even in the sciences, right? We're not monsters. We to give you an example here, right? When it comes to insects and other arthropods, right? We do make sure that we euthanize them in a way that we feel is humane, right? We may not know if it's actually humane, but for instance, a lot of ticks and insects, when I capture them, I will freeze them because it stimulates the natural instinct of winter has come, right? We're going to go into stasis or my time is done, and they expire, right? I don't go out in the field with a magnifying glass and burn the ticks, until they're done. So we do put some thought into that. And I think what and I'm hoping maybe you can comment on, there's no laws that say I have to do that, right? When we think of laws that govern research using animals, right, things like Iacuk, those mostly apply to vertebrates. There's no laws that govern what we do to insects and ticks to euthanize them, but we still think about that. We still do that. Like when you think about euthanizing organisms for research, right? How do you see that in a right or wrong perspective when it comes to research purposes?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of different ways to look at it, right? One of which is certainly looking at it in a very consequentialist sort of perspective. What are the benefits of the research, right? If the benefits of the research are going to outweigh the cost of a bunch of lives of ticks or mosquitoes or something like that, or perhaps rats and mice even when we start thinking about medical research, then we say it's A-okay. But we might still think beyond that, beyond just the consequences being better than the costs here. We might still think we have a duty to reduce the costs. So do we really need that many mice? Do we need that many ticks? How could we reduce that? Furthermore, there are welfare concerns, right? What conditions are they held under, right? You can think about all of the mental stimulation and stuff that maybe a mouse needs. I don't know what mental stimulation a tick needs. I don't know about, as far as ticks in captivity or something like that. Right. Fruit flies are, of course, really common in, I think, genetic research. Right? So there are all sorts of considerations, perhaps, about the fruit fly, too. So I think the other side of this, though, comes down to not just reduction, but asking whether it's necessary in the first place. So might there be different models and technologies that could be developed that allow us to eliminate the use of animals in research that results in their death? Right?
And then, we do strive for that, right? Do we strive hard enough for it? I don't know.
I think there's a bit of there's an over-reliance perhaps on the history of animal research and animal models, and certainly there is international legislation that has that has increased requirements of animal research. That I know some of that has been changing, but yeah, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, and again, like I want to stress because sometimes the perception of it is why reduce it if it's working for us, right? Why, and I get that, I understand that, right? Like if my tick research shows us better ways to kill ticks, right? That seems like a good thing to reduce that, right? But wouldn't it just be as good as to find a way to reduce the diseases that they transmit to humans and then let the ticks stay in the ecosystem and do what they're supposed to be doing, right? Like there are alternatives, and sometimes we avoid that easy, or we go for that easy answer, which is kill them all, instead of trying to find a way to stop what is making us sad, right? Which is getting mosquito and tick-borne diseases,
Sure.
right? And the other benefit to it is that sometimes when we switch away from the animal model, it gets better. Let's take a look at insulin, right? Insulin was first produced using mammals, right? You would have large animals that would produce the insulin and we would harvest it from them, but you could only get very small amounts, right? And so for those people that needed that insulin, I had a stat here. Yeah, so in 1981, it took over 23,000 animals to make 1 pound of insulin. 1 pound of insulin, right? Now, today we use bacteria, right? And they make the insulin for us, and they make a lot of it because that's all that they do. And so now we can have enough insulin to go around and help those people that suffer from medical conditions, right? Like diabetes. And so, here's an example of, we found a way to move away from using vertebrates and mammals. And now not only do we have less of an impact on our livestock that we can use for other things, and have ramped up production by finding an alternative to it. And we see this a lot. I just had taught class the other day and was like, I need a new example, and came across, nowadays they're making artificial skin from human cells instead of animal cells, right? Well, less chance of rejection, right?
Sure.
Easier to make, a lot more ethical things to it. So, finding that other ways of doing these things helps biologically, but again can help us with those moral and ethical dilemmas that, it makes us better people, right? Why is it that we have a search for morality and ethics, right? What does that do for us?
Yeah, right. And then certainly a big part of ethics, at least, is thinking about how we live well together, right? Oftentimes at root, when it comes to ethics, we're also asking questions about the good life. What does a good life look like, insofar as that helps us to define what well-being is? And then that goes on to determine, all right, well, then what should our politics look like? And further, how do these reasons extend out to other beings in the world, right? Such as ticks, or our dogs and cats, or perhaps even ecosystems, or Mars.
Or Mars.
And I think something else that's important here too is, and this is always a constant distinction I need to make in my ethics classes. There's an important distinction, at least most philosophers hold, between law and ethics. Right? So certainly the legal requirements may not say anything really about invertebrates or ticks and how we should treat them. But we still may have moral duties that go beyond whatever our legislation is or a particular profession's code of ethics. So ethics does not stop at the law.
Right.
It goes beyond it.
And so, I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of comes into this next segue, right? Like talking about what's going on in your classes, because, when we have these arguments, and they're in society, it's everywhere. It's not just dealing with other organisms, but we have these moral and ethical questions, even when dealing with ourselves, and there's no escaping it, right? Unless you want to bury your head in the sand, which I think some people have taken that approach to it. So, I guess the question becomes, right, like we're having this conversation, and I hate to use the word conclusions, but we're still coming up with ideas like, even though the law doesn't say to do it, maybe we should kill the ticks in a way that's natural and not harmful for them. how do we come to these conclusions? Because even though I've come to this conclusion, I can't say that I know how I came to these conclusions. So what is it that we do, or how is it that you teach that helps start the process or teach the students the process of being able to think of these bigger things?
Yeah, it's difficult, and I'm always running into this when talking with my students. It's like, yeah, philosophy's hard. Philosophy's hard, and you know what? From your one undergraduate class, you're not going to get a satisfying answer for yourself, which just means you got to take more classes with me. I'm sorry, right? That's just how it winds up going. And then next thing you know, you get a PhD, and you still don't know anything. It's incredible. But part of it, really, though, is argument, right? We can still look at the arguments, and we've got standards for arguments. Not all arguments are created equal. Some are good, some are bad. And so we can look into the arguments. That's really how philosophy is going to progress. There's an interesting question about whether we can ever really know the right answer to a particular question, which of course brings us to another complicated question. What is knowledge anyways? Can we know anything? Are we in a simulation? Who knows? But we can instead talk about a different standard. What do we have best reason to believe on the basis of the evidence? The evidence includes arguments as well as, perhaps in the case of ticks, research into their physiology, right? To understand whether there is an analog of our pain or something very like it, if that's the criterion that we want to go with. But yeah, diving into the arguments and really being able to evaluate those, question our own assumptions is a huge part of it. Yeah, philosophical argument, that's really going to be it. And I often tell my students sometimes too, it's helpful to look at philosophy, I think, as an infinite multiple choice problem, which is terrifying. It's hard to know what the right answer is, but we can at the very least start eliminating wrong answers, right? Think about the way we approach multiple choice problems, right? Well, I've got 4 options here. It's not A or B, so I have to consider C and D, and what do I have best reason to believe based on what I know? And that's what I tentatively go with.
And still, like, I think one thing a lot of people forget about is you think of like an athletic event. We go to hockey games all the time, right? We're always sitting at hockey games, right? And the way they get better at hockey is they practice, right? And I tell my biology students, the way you get better at biology, you practice. Would you say the same thing about philosophy? Like, is it something you practice?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those things I'm always telling my students in my logic classes. I'm teaching you logic. You can apply this every day, right? You're always going to be in conversations with other people. You're always going to be consuming media. You're going to wind up, having ethical conversations and wind up having to figure out whether you should lie or not in a particular instance, and so on and so forth. So there are countless opportunities to practice doing philosophy. We're always, the kinds of conversations that people like to have, right? That seem deep or whatever, right? Whether we have free will, whether God exists, these are philosophical questions. And we get better at thinking about these things the more we think about them. And even better, we think about them better when we think about them together. Right. So engaging in those sorts of conversations is really, really important, I think, for getting better at philosophy and then being able to evaluate one's reasoning and the reasoning of others, and come to conclusions you're at least tentatively happy with.
Right. And what I really have always liked about philosophy compared to like biology, right, is that like I'm a biologist, I can talk about biology, but really the only benefit or excitement I get is usually when I'm talking to another biologist. Because if I start talking about parasites as a dinner conversation to general people, it doesn't go well, right? But philosophy, on the other hand, right, you can apply that to any topic, right? And even much so biology. I mean, that's what we've been kind of focusing on so far right now, is how does philosophy apply to biological questions. But if you understand philosophy, it doesn't matter what field you're going into, you're going to use logic, right? And so you can use that skill towards something that you yourself are interested in. Which brings me to something I know that you did, I think last year, which I'm absolutely fascinated about. You taught a course in which the topic ultimately ended up being decided upon by the students.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little about, because that's philosophy and logic for something they're interested in.
Yeah, so my first semester here, I had an intro to philosophy course that had 3 or 4 students in it. So it was very small. The last time I taught intro to philosophy at University of Georgia, I had 100 students. Mm-hmm. So yeah, okay, I could run through the history of philosophy and do a sort of very standard class. But I thought with such a small group, it would be great to open it up to their interests. And ultimately, we had a few different topics, but we decided to do philosophy of video games.
Okay, yes.
So I did do a brief little history of philosophy. I kind of ran us through some of that, ran a little bit through the basics of logic and argumentation. And then the idea was to explore the different areas of philosophy through video games. So thinking about metaphysics, so questions about the nature of reality in video games, and then also ethics and video games. We can think about whether it's wrong to kill someone in Grand Theft Auto or something like that. And further questions like what is a game in the first place is a huge, huge question. Whether video games are art or not, that's another giant question that we dealt with. It was really great, and being able to tap into student interests with it was excellent. Because again, as you said, philosophy really, I always joke with my students, if it exists, there's philosophy in that thing. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't exist, there's also still probably philosophy in that thing, right? It really does apply, and I think part of it is you gain the skill to ask the right questions. Mm-hmm. No matter who you're talking to, you're able to sort of navigate it to figure out what the right or good questions are to push things further. And you can take the biologist and bring them on over to having a philosophical conversation with you. You can talk about the nature of matter and reality with a chemist and bother them about what phase of matter a quark is or something like that, and it gets messy from there.
That is so great, because I had one of my students in one of my classes was also in this, and they told me about it. And I love video games. I'm a gamer, so I love it. And I was just like, I would have loved to have just had a class like that as an undergrad. And so if any of you out there watching are gamers, right, and you got a philosophical opinion on video games, ethics, or morally, comment, right? We'll look into them and maybe give you our insights back on that. So, but that's a great example of how here at Northland we mold our education to the needs and even the interests of students. I do that in my own classes where, if I have students that are planning on going into veterinarian or medical health, right, I'll bring in case studies and things like that. If I have people who are interested in, say, forestry or agriculture, I'll bring in the parasites and pests that deal with plants and trees, right? And so making sure that everything I teach becomes applicable to what their career is. And I think that's great. What are some other examples you can think of here at Northland that students can get involved in that can help them practice logic and philosophy and ethics?
Sure. Well, besides just engaging with your fellow peers and your professors too, ask them the annoying questions. Something
right, yes.
Love it, right? I think that, for one, just generally while you're at college, you are in an environment where you have so many other people who are interested in studying stuff and having these conversations. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And so it's very easy to just organize something yourself. I think especially at Northland College, because we are a small college, it's easy to kind of organize with people and build something. If you want a club to talk about something, you can work with the Northland College Student Association to get that club going. Mm-hmm. And the small community really helps, and everything is pretty visible, I think, when it happens on campus, because we are small. So I think that's at least a big part of it, being able to engage with your peers just generally, and then you can organize with the Northland College Student Association to make a club, get resources, to engage in other activities, maybe go to a conference and things like that.
Yeah, talking about the Northland College Student Association, that's one of the most fascinating organizations that we have here on campus, because they are completely independent, right? They have their own budget, they collect money from students put in money towards this organization, they are a part of board meetings. They sit in representative board meetings. They elect all of their own officials from the student body. They organize events, including activism and protests that we've had here on campus, right? So really engaged in that. And then also helping out people making clubs and finding those interests that they like. I've seen a Dungeons and Dragons club, again, being excited about the games, but sailboating clubs, clubs for professional goals, right, becoming a doctor or a vet, right? So, you know, those student-led organizations where they get to make decisions in a safe environment, right? And it allows them the freedom to make a mistake. And then to make great things happen, right? Like, so it's there for them to learn and grow, right? Instead of just being tossed out in the world and being like, good luck, right?
Well, and I think that's one of the things that, at least for me, especially in my undergraduate education, I was very involved in all sorts of different clubs and organizations, and that was such a beneficial experience to me in terms of learning those skills for organizing people, organizing events, managing a budget, getting that leadership experience. That was so important. And so I think it's always like a college has that those sorts of resources. NCSA with its independence, I think, is super cool. And yeah, would be an excellent resource for prospective students to get involved with.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Lindquist, for joining me today and having this exciting conversation. And just throughout this conversation, I'm like, but I want to talk about this too and this too. We might have to have a round two of this kind of stuff because it's fascinating for me. So again, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I'm, again, Dr. Jeffrey Vincent, and this is Northland College. If you would like to learn more about Northland College, make sure you come out and visit our website at northland.edu. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube page. So Northland College on the YouTube page, where we're going to put these videos and hopefully some more exciting things to it. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, please leave them on the page and we'll take a look at them. Thank you so much. This is Biology Connections, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.